The hum of the hotel lobby was a low, insistent beast, chewing on the silence I preferred. It was the sound of my own personal hell, forced mingling, fluorescent lighting that made everyone look ill, and the cloying scent of industrial-grade potpourri. I was a man built for quiet corners and the soft glow of a computer screen, not for the back-patting, business card-swapping marathon that was the annual Sterling Solutions Sales and Synergy Conference. My job was in data, the silent, orderly backbone of the company. I translated numbers into narratives, finding the ghosts in the machine. I was not, by nature, a synergistic person. I clutched the handle of my rollerboard suitcase, my knuckles white. My anxiety was a physical thing, a tight band cinching around my chest. 3 days. 3 days of this. My only solace had been the promise of a private room, a sanctuary where I could decompress, order room service, and pretend the rest of the conference did not exist. I'd booked it months in advance, a king-sized bed and a view of the woods I probably would not even look at, but the knowledge of its existence was a balm. Ahead of me in the check-in line, a familiar laugh cut through the drone. Julian. Of course, it was Julian. He was leaning against the polished mahogany counter, one arm slung over his own luggage, charming the harried-looking young woman behind the desk. He was in sales, the vibrant, sun-drenched front porch of the company to my quiet, dusty attic. Everything about him was effortless. His dark hair fell in a carefully constructed state of disarray. His suit jacket was slung over his shoulder, revealing a crisp white shirt with the sleeves rolled up to his forearms, and his smile. That smile could probably sell ice to the Arctic. I watched him, a familiar, painful ache blooming in my chest. It was a crush I'd nursed in silence for the 2 years since I'd started at Sterling. It was pathetic, really. We barely interacted. Our orbits were entirely different. He was all handshakes and booming confidence. I was all spreadsheets and quiet observation. But I observed him. I observed the way his eyes crinkled when he laughed for real, the way he'd run a hand through his hair when he was concentrating on a pitch, the low, rumbling timbre of his voice that carried across the office floor. He turned then, as if sensing my gaze, and his smile widened. He saw me. My heart did a stupid, frantic little tap dance against my ribs. Leo, man, you made it. Thought you were going to try and get out of it this year. I offered a weak smile in return, my voice feeling rusty. They made it mandatory. They always do, he said, his grin undiminished. He turned back to the desk clerk, who was now typing furiously, a frown creasing her brow. Any luck, Sarah? He knew her name. Of course, he did. She looked up, her expression a mask of professional panic. Mr. Vance, Mr. Garcia, I am so sorry. It seems we've had a system glitch. A massive overbooking. The local folk festival, we're completely full. My blood ran cold. No, absolutely not. The sanctuary, my one promised escape, was evaporating before my eyes. I have a confirmation number, I said, my voice tighter than I intended. Booked 3 months ago. I know, sir. I see it right here, she said, her voice trembling slightly. Both of you. Confirmed for King Suites. She looked from my face to Julian's, her gaze pleading. Julian just looked amused, one eyebrow arched in curiosity. He was a man who saw problems as interesting puzzles, not as impending disasters. So what's the solution, Sarah? Julian asked, his tone smooth and reassuring. She took a deep breath, her eyes darting around the lobby as if hoping for an escape. We have 1 room left. It was a last-minute cancellation. The Pine Ridge Suite. The honeymoon suite. Julian's laugh was a short, sharp bark of surprise. You're kidding. She shook her head, her cheeks flushed a deep, painful red. It's all we have. It has a single king bed. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. A single bed. With Julian. The thought was so absurd, so terrifyingly intimate, that my brain simply short-circuited. I opened my mouth to protest, to demand they find me another hotel, to offer to sleep in my rental car, anything. But no sound came out. Julian looked at me, his eyes glittering with a strange light. It was a mix of humor and something else, something I couldn't decipher. He was studying my reaction, my wide-eyed panic. Then, he turned back to the clerk. We'll take it. What? The word finally escaped my lips, a strangled squeak. He ignored me. Just the 1 key then? He asked Sarah. She nodded, her relief palpable. She slid a single plastic key card across the counter. Julian picked it up, dangling it from his index finger. He held it in the space between us, a small, white rectangle that held the potential for either my complete undoing or something else entirely. He looked at me, that cocky, infuriatingly handsome grin plastered on his face. "Well, partner," he said, his voice a low, conspiratorial murmur that sent a shiver down my spine. "Looks like we share." He turned and strode toward the elevators, leaving me to trail in his wake, my heart hammering a frantic, terrified rhythm against the cage of my ribs. I felt like I was walking toward a cliff edge in the dark. The room was just a room. The bed was just a bed. But sharing them with him felt like a monumental shift in the tectonic plates of my carefully ordered universe. The elevator ride was silent, but it was the loudest silence I had ever experienced. The air was thick with the scent of his cologne, something clean and sharp, like sandalwood and bergamot, and the faint, clean smell of the hotel's air conditioning. I stood in my designated corner, staring at the polished brass doors, acutely aware of him standing just a few feet away. I could feel the warmth radiating from his body. I could hear the soft whisper of his breathing. My own breath was trapped in my lungs. He was humming, a low, tuneless sound that seemed to vibrate in the small, enclosed space. I risked a glance at him. He was watching our ascent on the floor indicator, a small, private smile playing on his lips. Was he enjoying this? The absurdity of it? Or was he enjoying my discomfort? I couldn't tell. With Julian, I could never tell. He was a master of veiling his true thoughts behind a veneer of easygoing charm. The doors dinged open on the top floor. The Pine Ridge Suite. Of course. It was at the very end of the hall, its double doors setting it apart from the others. Julian slid the keycard into the slot, and the small green light blinked with a kind of finality. This was happening. He pushed the door open and gestured for me to enter first. A gentleman, or a predator letting his prey walk into the trap. My mind was a carousel of catastrophic thoughts. I stepped inside, my suitcase rumbling behind me on the plush carpet. The room was enormous and ridiculously romantic. A massive stone fireplace dominated one wall, unlit but imposing. A sprawling sectional sofa faced a wall of floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out onto a dense forest of pine trees, their tips shrouded in the late afternoon mist. And there, in the center of it all, like a throne on a raised platform, was the bed. It was a behemoth, a king-sized monstrosity draped in a crisp white duvet and an obscene number of pillows. It seemed to take up the entire room, the entire universe. Julian whistled softly as he came in behind me, closing the door with a soft click. The sound echoed in the cavernous space. Well, they weren't kidding. This is something. He dropped his bags by the door and walked over to the windows, pressing a hand against the cool glass. Great view. I could only stare at the bed. One bed. My brain kept repeating the phrase like a broken record. One bed. One bed. One bed. "I'll take the couch," I blurted out. The words tumbled out of me, clumsy and desperate. Julian turned from the window, his expression unreadable. He walked over to the sectional, sank into its plush cushions, and bounced once. "Nope. This thing is a rock. Besides," he said, gesturing around the room, "we're grown men, Leo. I think we can handle sharing a bed without it turning into a slumber party fiasco. It's huge. We'll barely know the other is there." I knew he was wrong. I would be acutely, painfully aware of his presence. Every breath, every shift in weight, every rustle of the sheets would be magnified in the darkness. I would lie there, rigid and sleepless, counting the seconds until morning. But I couldn't argue. It would make me seem childish, neurotic. So I just nodded, my throat too tight to form words. I wheeled my suitcase over to the far side of the bed, creating as much physical and psychological distance as I possibly could. My side, his side. A silent, imaginary line was drawn down the middle of the pristine white duvet. He watched me unpack my meager belongings, a few neatly folded shirts, my DOP kit, a well-worn paperback, with that same look of detached amusement. He, on the other hand, unpacked with a kind of casual chaos, tossing clothes onto a chair, setting his own DOP kit on the sprawling bathroom counter with a confident thud. The bathroom was another marvel of absurd luxury, with a giant walk-in shower that had 2 shower heads and a jacuzzi tub big enough for 4. My mind recoiled from the implications. Dibs on the first shower, he called out, his voice echoing slightly off the marble tiles. Need to wash the travel grime off before the welcome reception. The welcome reception. I had completely forgotten. More people. More small talk. More opportunities for me to stand awkwardly in a corner, nursing a drink and wishing I could dematerialize. Right, I managed to say. I sat on the edge of the bed, my side, and pretended to be absorbed in my phone, scrolling through emails I had already read. The sound of the shower starting was a low hiss, followed by the muffled sound of Julian moving around. I could hear the clink of a shampoo bottle, the sluice of water. My imagination, my worst enemy, began painting vivid pictures. Water streaming over his broad shoulders, down the strong column of his back. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to banish the images. This was a professional trip. He was my colleague, and I was losing my mind. The minutes stretched on. I could feel the tension coiling in my shoulders, my neck. I was a trespasser in my own temporary home. Every sound from the bathroom was a reminder of his proximity, of the intimacy of our shared space. The air grew humid, carrying the scent of his soap, not the hotel's generic floral stuff, but something he'd brought himself. It smelled like cedar and something faintly spicy, a clean, masculine scent that seemed to fill the room, to seep into the very fabric of the furniture. It was the same scent that clung to him in the office, but here, concentrated and warm, it was intoxicating. When he finally emerged, a towel slung low on his hips, another draped over his shoulders, my breath caught in my throat. Droplets of water clung to his hair, his shoulders, the dusting of dark hair on his chest. He was not built like a model. He was built like a man who lived in his body with ease, solid, real, and utterly overwhelming. He seemed to suck all the oxygen out of the room. All yours, he said, his voice husky from the steam. He did not seem to be the slightest bit self-conscious. To him, this was nothing. A logistical hurdle. To me, it felt like I was being flayed alive, my every nerve exposed and raw. I mumbled a thank you and fled to the bathroom, closing the door behind me and leaning against it, my heart pounding. The room was a cloud of warm, cedar-scented steam. His towel was discarded on the floor. His DOP kit was open on the counter, a jumble of razors, shaving cream, and cologne. It was a small, domestic scene, an intimate glimpse into his life that I had no right to see. I took a shower that was both scaldingly hot and brutally fast, trying to wash away not just the travel grime, but the thoughts that were spiraling in my head. I scrubbed my skin until it was pink, focusing on the sensation, on anything other than the man who was just on the other side of the door. When I came out, dressed in my own conference-appropriate attire of slacks and a button-down shirt, he was already dressed, standing by the window again, nursing a drink from the minibar. He had poured one for me, too. A glass of amber liquid sat waiting on the small table between two armchairs. Thought you might need this, he said, gesturing to the glass. Liquid courage for the schmooze fest. I was surprised by the gesture. It was thoughtful. I picked up the glass. Scotch. He'd remembered. I'd mentioned it once, months ago, during a forced team-building event. I had been certain no one was listening, least of all him. But he had heard, and he had remembered. The thought sent a fresh wave of warmth, entirely unrelated to the alcohol, through my chest. Thanks, I said, my voice softer than before. We stood there for a moment, in a silence that felt different from the one in the elevator. It was less tense, more contemplative. The sun was beginning to set, casting long, dramatic shadows across the room and painting the sky outside in hues of orange and deep purple. You know, Julian said, his voice low, still looking out the window. I'm not a monster, Leo. If this is really making you uncomfortable, I can try to fight with the front desk again. Maybe find a rollaway bed, something. His sudden sincerity caught me off guard. The playful, teasing mask had dropped for a moment, and I saw something else in his expression as he turned to look at me. Concern. Genuine concern. It was a vulnerability I had never seen in him before. A moment of softness. And in that moment, something inside me shifted. My fear, which had been a raging inferno, subsided to a low, manageable flame. He was trying to be kind. The least I could do was meet him halfway. No, I said, surprised by the firmness in my own voice. It's fine. You were right. We're adults. It's one bed, for a couple of nights. It's not a big deal. I was lying, of course. It was a very big deal. But I was also, strangely, telling the truth. I did not want him to find a rollaway bed. A part of me, a reckless, foolish part, wanted this. It wanted the proximity, the tension, the terrifying, exhilarating possibility of it all. He studied my face for a long moment, his gaze intense, searching. I felt stripped bare under that look, as if he could see right through my carefully constructed walls to the frantic, yearning creature inside. Then, that slow, familiar grin returned, but it was different this time. Softer. Okay, he said simply. Good, he raised his glass. To synergy, then. I clinked my glass against his, the sound a small, clear chime in the quiet room. To synergy. The welcome reception was exactly as I'd anticipated. A ballroom filled with too many people, the air thick with the smell of perfume and catered food. The noise was a constant, deafening roar of conversations and forced laughter. Normally, I would have found a dark corner and blended into the wallpaper, counting the minutes until I could politely escape. But tonight was different. Julian stayed by my side. He did not have to. He could have easily been swallowed up by the crowd, drawn into circles of backslapping salesmen and ambitious executives. He was a natural in this environment. But he stayed with me, a solid, grounding presence. He drew me into conversations, introducing me not as Leo from Data, but as Leo, the guy who actually makes sense of all the numbers we pull out of thin air. He made me sound important. He made me feel seen. I watched him work the room, not as a separate entity, but as part of a temporary duo. He'd rest a hand on the small of my back to guide me through a thicket of people, a casual, fleeting touch that sent a jolt of electricity through my entire body. He'd lean in close to be heard over the din, his breath warm against my ear, the scent of his cologne and the scotch he was drinking a dizzying combination. My mind catalogued every touch, every glance, every low-voiced aside. I was an analyst, after all, and Julian had become my most compelling data set. Was I imagining it? Was I reading too much into the simple camaraderie of a colleague trying to be nice? Probably, but the hand on my back lingered a second too long. The look in his eyes when I made a dry, sarcastic comment that actually made him laugh, a real, genuine laugh, held a warmth that felt like more than just professional courtesy. We left early, using the excuse of an early morning breakout session. Walking back to the room, the hallway felt impossibly long. The shared keycard, the single door, the giant bed waiting behind it, all of it loomed in my mind. The easy camaraderie of the party evaporated, replaced by the simmering tension that had been there from the start. Inside, the room was dark and quiet. The only light came from the moon, filtering through the massive windows and casting a silvery glow over the furniture. It looked different at night, softer, more intimate. Julian went to the bathroom first, and I used the time to change into a t-shirt and a pair of worn-out pajama pants in the dark corner of the room, my back to the door. My movements were stiff and awkward. I felt like a teenager at a sleepover, clumsy and hyper-aware of my own body. When he came out, he was wearing only a pair of gray sweatpants, slung low on his hips. His chest was bare. In the moonlight, the lines of his body were all sharp angles and soft shadows. My mouth went dry. He did not say anything. He just walked to his side of the bed, pulled back the covers, and slipped inside. I heard the rustle of the sheets, the soft sigh as he settled onto the mattress. I stood frozen for a long moment, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. This is it. I am getting into bed with Julian Vance. The thought was both terrifying and thrilling. I took a deep breath and walked to my side. I slid under the covers as carefully as possible, trying not to make a single ripple, and lay on my back, ramrod straight, my hands folded on my chest like a corpse. I stayed as close to the edge of the mattress as I could without falling off. The silence stretched, thick and heavy. I was intensely aware of everything. The whisper of the air conditioning, the faint scent of pine from outside, the sound of Julian's breathing, slow and steady, just a few feet away. I could feel the heat of his body across the small expanse of sheet that separated us. It was a living, breathing warmth that seemed to call to me, to pull me closer. I lay there for what felt like hours, my eyes wide open in the darkness, staring at the ceiling. My entire body was rigid with tension. I was so afraid of moving, of accidentally brushing against him, of doing anything that might break the fragile truce of our shared space. Leo? His voice, a low rumble in the dark, made me jump. Yeah. My own voice was a croak. You can breathe, you know? I don't bite. There was a hint of laughter in his tone. Unless you're into that. My face flushed hot in the darkness. He was teasing me. Of course, he was. It was his default setting. But the words hung in the air between us, charged with an unspoken meaning. Sorry, I mumbled. Not used to sharing. Me neither, he admitted, and his voice was softer now, all traces of humor gone. Look, can you just relax? You're so tense I can feel the mattress vibrating. Just turn on your side. Face away from me if it makes you more comfortable. He was right. I was being ridiculous. I took a shaky breath and slowly, carefully, rolled onto my side, my back to him. It was a small concession, but it felt monumental. It felt like a surrender. I heard him shift behind me, the rustle of the sheets loud in the silence. The mattress dipped slightly as he moved closer. My entire body went rigid again. He was so close. Too close. I could feel the heat of his body radiating against my back, even through our clothes and the blankets. It was an intense, enveloping warmth that seemed to seep into my bones. Better, he murmured, his voice a low vibration just behind my head. I couldn't speak. I just nodded, a tiny, jerky movement. I lay there, my back to him, every nerve ending on high alert. I felt the ghost of his touch, the imagined brush of his hand against my shoulder. The air was thick with things unsaid, with a tension so palpable it felt like a third person in the bed with us. I listened to his breathing, trying to match its slow, steady rhythm with my own frantic, shallow breaths. And slowly, impossibly, as the minutes ticked by, the rigid line of my spine began to soften. The warmth from his body was not threatening. It was comforting, grounding. Against all odds, I felt a strange sense of safety I had not felt in a very long time. And somewhere in the deep, dark hours of the morning, suspended in that strange space between terror and longing, I finally fell asleep. The next morning, I woke to the smell of coffee. For a disoriented moment, I did not know where I was. The bed was too big, the sheets too soft. Then it all came rushing back. The overbooked hotel. The honeymoon suite. Julian. I opened my eyes. I was still on my side, my back to the center of the bed. The other side was empty, the sheets cool. Panic flared in my chest for a second. Had he left? Had he gone to the front desk and demanded another room after all? I sat up and saw him. He was sitting in one of the armchairs by the window, a steaming mug in his hands, already dressed in a pair of dark jeans and a soft gray Henley that stretched across his chest. The morning light streamed in around him, making him look like some kind of rugged, domestic deity. He was just looking out at the trees, a thoughtful expression on his face. He must have heard me move, because he turned his head and smiled. It was a small, quiet smile, not his usual salesman grin. Morning, he said. There's more coffee, if you want some. The room service guy was a ghost. Didn't even knock. I looked at the small table and saw a second mug waiting for me. He had ordered coffee for me. The thought was so simple, so unexpectedly kind, that it threw me off balance. Thanks, I mumbled, swinging my legs out of bed. I felt exposed and rumpled in my old t-shirt and pajama pants. I quickly grabbed my clothes and retreated to the bathroom, my cheeks burning. As I showered and dressed, I replayed the night in my head. His teasing comment, his quiet reassurance, the feeling of his warmth against my back. It all felt like a dream, hazy and unreal in the bright light of day. Maybe I had imagined the intimacy, the charged atmosphere. Maybe to him, it was just a joke, a way to diffuse an awkward situation. When I came out, he was still in the chair, but he was looking at his phone now, scrolling through emails. Back to business. The spell was broken. We were just two colleagues who had to share a room. That was all. The first session is at 9, he said without looking up. Keynote on market disruption. Should be a real thrill. His tone was dry, laced with his usual sarcasm. Can't wait, I said, matching his tone. I poured myself a cup of coffee. It was black, just how I liked it. He had remembered that, too. My heart did another one of its stupid little flips. Stop it, I told myself. It means nothing. He's just a perceptive person. It's why he's good at his job. We spent the day in a series of freezing conference rooms, listening to speakers drone on about synergy and paradigm shifts. But just like the night before, Julian made it bearable. He'd lean over and whisper a sarcastic comment about the speaker's PowerPoint slides. He'd pass me a note that just said, "Are you still awake?" with a poorly drawn doodle of a sleeping stick figure. He saved me a seat at lunch, and we talked about things that had nothing to do with work, bad movies, the best place to get pizza in the city, his sister's new baby. I found myself relaxing. I found myself having fun. I was seeing a different side of him, a side that was not all charm and confidence. There was a genuine warmth there, a quick wit, a surprising depth. And the more I saw, the more I fell. It was a slow, terrifying, and utterly inevitable descent. The physical touches continued, small and insignificant to anyone else, but monumental to me. His knee would brush against mine under the table. He'd clap a hand on my shoulder after I made a point in a breakout session. Each touch was a spark, lighting up a constellation of sensations on my skin. I was a man starved, and he was feeding me crumbs, and I was grateful for every single one. That evening, a group of our colleagues insisted we all go out for dinner at a local steakhouse. I tried to beg off, but Julian wouldn't let me. "Come on, Leo," he said, slinging an arm around my shoulders in a casual, friendly gesture that made my pulse skyrocket. "You can't just hide in the room. Besides, I need a buffer against Henderson from accounting." So I went, and it was fine. I sat next to Julian, and he acted as that buffer for me, deflecting the boring questions, including me in the interesting conversations. At one point, our hands brushed as we both reached for the salt. His fingers were warm. He did not pull away immediately. For a fraction of a second, his pinky finger hooked around mine, a tiny, almost imperceptible connection. Then it was gone. My heart was pounding. I risked a glance at him. He was looking at me, his expression unreadable in the dim light of the restaurant. His gaze was intense, searching. It felt like he was asking a question I did not know how to answer. Then Henderson from accounting asked him about quarterly projections, and the moment was broken. But it stayed with me, that fleeting touch, that questioning look. It replayed in my mind on a loop for the rest of the night. Walking back to the hotel, the air was cool and crisp, smelling of pine and damp earth. The others were walking ahead of us, their loud laughter echoing in the quiet street. We walked in a comfortable silence. "You were quiet tonight," Julian said, breaking the silence. "I'm always quiet," I replied. "Yeah, but this was a different kind of quiet," he said. He stopped walking and turned to face me under the dim glow of a street lamp. "You okay? You seemed distracted. I am falling in love with you, and it is terrifying me." The words were right there, on the tip of my tongue. But I couldn't say them. I couldn't risk it. The fragile, beautiful thing we were building, this friendship, this camaraderie, was too precious to shatter with the weight of my feelings. "Just tired," I lied. "Long day." He nodded, but he didn't look convinced. He kept looking at me with that intense, searching gaze. It felt like he was trying to peel back my layers, to read the secrets I kept locked away. "You know," he said, his voice dropping lower, "you're a hard person to read, Leo Garcia." "I'm an open book," I said, trying for levity. "It's just written in a very boring language." He laughed, a low, soft sound. "I don't think it's boring at all," he said. "I think it's fascinating." We stood there for a moment longer, the world seeming to fade away until it was just the two of us in a bubble of lamplight. My heart was a frantic bird beating against my ribs. He was standing so close. All I had to do was lean forward. All I had to do was close the distance between us. But I couldn't. Fear held me paralyzed. The fear of rejection, of misreading everything, of making a complete fool of myself. He must have seen the conflict in my eyes, because he let out a soft sigh and the intensity in his gaze softened. He gave me a small, almost sad smile. "Come on," he said, turning and starting to walk again. "Let's get back." The second night in the bed was different. The initial terror was gone, replaced by a low, simmering hum of awareness. I lay on my side again, my back to him, but this time it was not a retreat. It was an invitation. I was achingly conscious of the space between us, a space that felt both vast and infinitesimal. I don't know how much time passed. I was hovering in that state between wakefulness and sleep when I felt the mattress dip behind me. My breath hitched. He was moving closer. Slowly, deliberately. I could feel the heat of his body, closer than before. Then, I felt a tentative pressure against my back. He had rolled over and pressed his front against my back. his chest against my shoulder blades, his hips against mine, his legs tangled with mine. It was not an accidental brushing in the night. It was a conscious, deliberate act. My entire body went rigid, every muscle screaming. His arm came around my waist, his hand resting lightly on my stomach. His skin was warm. I could feel the calluses on his fingertips through the thin fabric of my t-shirt. He tucked his face into the space between my neck and shoulder, his breath a warm, steady puff against my skin. The scent of him, cedar and soap and julienne, enveloped me. I lay there, frozen, hardly daring to breathe. My mind was a chaotic swirl of panic and disbelief and a wild, soaring hope. This couldn't be happening. I had to be dreaming. "Leo," he whispered, his voice a deep vibration that seemed to travel through my entire body. "Yeah." I breathed out, the word barely audible. "Is this okay?" The question was so soft, so vulnerable, it shattered the last of my defenses. He was asking for permission. He was giving me an out. All I had to do was say no, and he would retreat to his side of the bed, and we would pretend this never happened. But I couldn't say no. I didn't want to. I had been dreaming of this, of him, for 2 years. And now it was real. Instead of answering, I did something braver than I had ever done in my life. I reached up and covered his hand with my own, lacing our fingers together over my stomach. I felt him relax against me, a long, slow exhalation of breath. His hold on me tightened, just slightly, pulling me closer until there was no space left between us. He was a solid, warm weight against my back, a human shield against the world. He didn't say anything else. He didn't have to. The answer was in the way our fingers were intertwined, in the steady rhythm of his heart beating against my back, in the simple, profound comfort of his presence. For the first time, the giant, lonely bed did not feel empty. It felt full. It felt like home. And nestled in his arms, I fell into the deepest, most peaceful sleep I had had in years. The harsh, digital chirping of the alarm clock shattered the peace. 6 a.m. The final day of the conference. Reality. I opened my eyes, my body warm and heavy with sleep. For a blissful second, I'd forgotten. Then I felt it. The weight of an arm still draped over my waist, the solid presence of a body pressed against my back. It hadn't been a dream. A wave of panic, cold and sharp, washed over me. What did this mean? What happens now? The safety of the night, of the darkness, was gone. Now there was morning and light and the inevitable need to talk. I lay perfectly still, pretending to be asleep, my heart hammering against my ribs. I felt Julian stir behind me. He stretched, his muscles flexing against my back, and then his arm was gone. The loss of his warmth was immediate and acute. I felt suddenly, desperately cold. I heard him sit up, the mattress shifting with his weight. I kept my eyes closed, my breathing even. I could hear him moving around the room, the soft footfalls on the carpet, the click of the coffee maker. He was giving me space, or he was regretting it. My mind, ever the pessimist, latched onto the latter. He was awake, he was sober, and he was regretting the impulsive intimacy of the night before. The thought was a lead weight in my stomach. After what felt like an eternity, I forced myself to move. I rolled over and sat up, running a hand through my messy hair. He was standing by the window, just like the morning before, a mug of coffee in his hand. He was already dressed. He turned when he heard me, and his face was a blank mask. No smile, no warmth, just a neutral, unreadable expression. "Morning," he said, his voice flat. "Coffee's ready." The casual warmth of the previous day was gone. The air was thick with a new kind of tension, an awkward, uncertain silence. The morning after unease. It was 1,000 times worse than the initial awkwardness of sharing the room. "Thanks," I said, my own voice strained. I got out of bed and went about my morning routine on autopilot, my movements stiff. We moved around each other in the large room like two strangers, carefully avoiding eye contact, not brushing against each other. The space that had felt so intimate and charged just hours before now felt like a minefield. We didn't talk as we got ready. The silence was deafening. Every unspoken word, every unanswered question, hung in the air between us. I wanted to say something, anything, to break the tension. I wanted to ask him if last night had meant anything to him. I wanted to tell him what it had meant to me. But the words were stuck in my throat, choked by fear. We walked to the final conference sessions in that same heavy silence. We sat together, out of habit, but there was a physical distance between us now, a carefully maintained gap of a few inches. He didn't whisper jokes. He didn't pass me notes. He just stared straight ahead, his jaw tight. It was torture. I felt like I was breaking apart from the inside out. The hope that had bloomed in my chest the night before was wilting, dying. I had misread everything. It was just a moment of strange, circumstantial intimacy, a fluke. To him, it meant nothing. I had built a fantasy in my head, and now I had to watch it crumble into dust. The conference ended at noon. People were shaking hands, exchanging final business cards, promising to keep in touch. I just wanted to disappear. My flight wasn't until 7 that evening. I had hours to kill, and I was dreading the thought of spending them in that silent, tension-filled hotel room with Julian. As the final speaker wrapped up, Julian leaned over, his voice low and devoid of emotion. "I'm going to check out. I'll leave the key at the desk for you." He was leaving. He was running away. The confirmation was a sharp, physical pain. "Okay," I managed to say, my voice a hollow whisper. He stood up and walked away without a backward glance, disappearing into the crowd. I sat there, frozen in my chair, as the ballroom emptied around me. I felt numb. It was over. Whatever it was, or whatever I had thought it was over. I don't know how long I sat there. Eventually, a hotel employee started clearing the tables, and I realized I had to move. I walked back to the room in a daze. I felt hollowed out, empty. When I got to the suite, the door was slightly ajar. I pushed it open. Julian was there. He hadn't left. He was standing in the middle of the room, his suitcase packed, and waiting by the door. He was just standing there, waiting for me. He looked up when I came in, and for the first time that day, his expression was not blank. It was anxious. He looked as uncertain and terrified as I felt. "I thought you were checking out," I said, my voice barely audible. "I was," he said. "I got to the lobby and I couldn't." He took a step toward me. "Leo, we need to talk." My heart, which I thought had ceased to function, started beating again, a slow, heavy thud. "What happened last night?" he started, then stopped, running a hand through his hair in a gesture of frustration. This was not the confident, smooth-talking Julian I knew. This was someone else. Someone vulnerable. "Look, I'm sorry about this morning." I was freaking out. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know if I'd crossed a line. "A line?" I asked, my voice trembling. "I've wanted to. I've been attracted to you for a long time, Leo," he blurted out, the words coming in a rush. "Longer than you think. I see the way you watch me in the office. I was hoping you felt the same way. This trip, this ridiculous room situation. I thought it was a sign, a chance. But I pushed it. Last night, I pushed it. And this morning you were so quiet, and I thought I'd screwed everything up. I thought I'd misread everything and just made you incredibly uncomfortable." I stared at him, my mind struggling to process his words. He was attracted to me. He had been watching me, just as I had been watching him. The entire narrative I had constructed in my head, of unrequited love, of my own invisibility, was wrong. We had been two people on opposite sides of a room, staring at each other, both too afraid to cross the floor. "You didn't misread it," I said, my voice finally finding its strength. "You didn't screw anything up." A wave of relief washed over his face, so profound it was like watching the sun break through the clouds. He closed the distance between us in 2 long strides. He stopped just in front of me, his eyes searching mine. "So that hand-holding thing," he said, a ghost of his old, teasing smile returning. "That was a yes." "It was a yes," I confirmed, a real smile, my first of the day, spreading across my face. He reached out and cupped my jaw, his thumb stroking my cheek. His touch was hesitant, gentle. "Can I?" he started to ask. I didn't let him finish. I leaned in and kissed him. It was not a desperate, frantic kiss. It was slow and soft and sure. It was a kiss of relief, of recognition. It tasted of coffee and mint and the end of a long, lonely wait. His lips were even softer than I had imagined. He made a sound in the back of his throat, a low groan, and deepened the kiss, his other hand coming up to tangle in my hair. It was honest. It was not for show, not a performance, not an accident in the dark. It was a conscious choice, made in the bright light of day. It was everything. When we finally broke apart, we were both breathless. He rested his forehead against mine, his eyes still closed. I could feel the light tremble in his hands. He was not as unshakably confident as he seemed. He was just as scared as I was. "So," he said, his voice a husky whisper. "What now?" "I don't know," I admitted. "My flight is at 7. "Mine's at 8, he said. He opened his eyes, and they were full of a warmth that made my heart ache. "Let's miss them." The suggestion was insane. Irresponsible. We had work tomorrow. We had lives to get back to. But looking at him, with his hand still on my face and his forehead pressed against mine, it felt like the sanest, most rational idea in the world. "Okay," I said, without a moment's hesitation. His grin was dazzling. Okay. We stayed. We called the airline, pushed our flights to the next day, citing a vaguely plausible work emergency. We called our boss and did the same. And then, we had the rest of the day. An entire, unexpected day just for us. It was strange and wonderful. We were no longer just colleagues. We were something else. Something new and undefined. We left the hotel room, the site of so much tension and confusion, and just walked. We found a small, quiet trail that led into the woods behind the hotel. The air was cool and smelled of pine needles and damp earth. We walked for miles, not saying much, but the silence was different now. It was easy, comfortable. He reached for my hand, and this time, I didn't hesitate. I laced my fingers with his, and we walked on, our hands swinging between us. He told me about his family, about growing up in a small town, about his fears that he was not as successful as everyone thought he was. I told him about my love for the quiet order of data, about my own loneliness, about the feeling of being an observer in my own life. It was a day of small, quiet confessions, of peeling back the layers we presented to the world and showing each other the real, vulnerable people underneath. We found a little diner in the nearby town and had lunch. We sat in a worn vinyl booth, and he stole French fries from my plate, and I laughed, a real, unforced laugh. It felt so normal, so easy. I felt like I had known him my whole life. When we got back to the room, the afternoon sun was streaming through the windows, bathing everything in a warm, golden light. The bed, which had been a source of so much anxiety, now just looked inviting. He led me over to it, our hands still clasped together. He sat on the edge and pulled me down to face him, so our knees were touching. He didn't kiss me. He just looked at me, his gaze soft and full of a wonder that mirrored my own. "I've been in love with you since that company picnic 2 years ago," I confessed, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. "You were trying to teach the CEO's kid how to throw a frisbee, and you were so patient, and you had this ridiculous, happy grin on your face. And I just knew." A slow, beautiful smile spread across his face. The Henderson kid? He was a terror. I think he hit me in the head with that frisbee 3 times. He reached out and tucked a stray piece of hair behind my ear. "For what it's worth, I noticed you too. You were sitting under that big oak tree, reading a book, and you looked so peaceful, so self-contained. I wanted to come over and talk to you, but I didn't know what to say. I've never been nervous around anyone before." "You? Nervous?" I said, incredulous. "Terrified," he confirmed. "You were like this quiet, unsolvable puzzle, and all I wanted to do was figure you out." He leaned in then and kissed me again, and this time there was a new urgency to it, a new heat. All the unspoken feelings, all the pent-up longing of the past 2 years poured into that kiss. It was a kiss that unraveled me, that remade me. We spent the rest of the afternoon in that bed, in the warm sunlight. It was not a frantic, hurried thing. It was a slow, deliberate exploration. It was the touch of skin against skin, the whisper of names, the mapping of bodies. It was more intimate than anything I had ever experienced. It was the consummation of a feeling that had been growing in the dark for far too long. He was gentle and patient, and he made me feel cherished and safe and seen in a way I had never been before. Later, as dusk settled over the forest, we lay tangled in the sheets, his arm a heavy, comforting weight over my chest, my head resting on his shoulder. The room was quiet, peaceful. "So," I said, my voice husky, "back to reality tomorrow." I felt him press a kiss to the top of my head. "This is reality, Leo," he said softly. "This is more real than any of that." He was right. The spreadsheets, the conference calls, the office politics, that was the noise. This, the quiet intimacy of this room, the steady beat of his heart under my ear, this was the signal. The next morning, We woke up together. There was no awkwardness, no unease. He rolled over and kissed me, his lips curved into a sleepy smile. "Morning, partner," he murmured against my mouth. We ordered room service for breakfast and ate it in bed, laughing as I spilled coffee on the pristine white duvet. We packed our bags in a comfortable silence, our movements easy and synchronized. It felt domestic. It felt right. Standing at the door, ready to leave the suite that had become our unexpected sanctuary, he took my hand. "Ready?" he asked. I looked around the room one last time, at the giant bed, the fireplace, the windows looking out onto the pines. It was just a room, but it had changed everything. I was not the same man who had walked into it 3 days ago, rigid with anxiety and loneliness. That man was gone. I squeezed his hand. "Ready." The trip back was the complete opposite of the trip there. We shared a cab to the airport, our thighs pressed together, our hands intertwined on the seat between us. We checked in together. We sat at the gate, and he rested his head on my shoulder while he read over his notes. It was all so easy, so natural. The fear was gone, replaced by a quiet, steady certainty. Our flights were at different gates. The inevitable moment of separation arrived. We stood in the middle of the busy terminal, the world rushing around us. "So, I'll see you at the office," I said, the words feeling ridiculously inadequate. He smiled, that soft, genuine smile that was just for me. "You will." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a key. Not a hotel key card, but a real, old-fashioned metal key. He pressed it into my palm. "What's this?" I asked, looking down at it. "It's the key to my apartment," he said, his voice steady. "For whenever you want. To talk. To watch a bad movie. To just be quiet in the same room." I stared at the key, a small, solid piece of metal that felt impossibly heavy in my hand. It was a promise, a future, an invitation into his life, not just for a few stolen days, but for real. I looked up at him, my throat tight with an emotion so overwhelming I couldn't put a name to it. "Julian." He leaned in and gave me a quick, firm kiss, right there in the middle of the airport. He didn't care who saw. "My flight's boarding," he said against my lips. "Text me when you land." And then he was gone, walking away, disappearing into the crowd. I stood there for a long moment, the key still warm in my hand. I thought about the man I was just a few days ago, a man who believed he was destined to be an observer, to live his life in the quiet margins. I had been so convinced that my world was small and self-contained. But a chance overbooking, a shared room, and a man who was brave enough to cross the floor had changed everything. He hadn't just figured out my puzzle. He had become a part of it. He was the missing piece I never knew I was looking for. I closed my hand around the key, the metal edges digging into my palm. It felt solid. It felt real. It felt like a new beginning. I walked toward my gate, a slow smile spreading across my face. For the first time in a very long time, I felt like I was not just going back to my apartment. I felt like I was going home.